Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, welcome everyone to this webinar on Park launches webinar on artificial intelligence. In particular, we're going to talk about ChatGPT and similar large language model programs that have created quite a bit of a upheaval, not only in the markets but also within various sectors that are likely to be affected by them. And in particular, there's been quite a lot of hue and cry within the within academia and schools, where people feel that old ways of testing pupil and assessing and teaching and researching are going to go out of favor because of these new technologies. So we have a very distinguished panel with us today to talk about ChatGPT and related AI models, as well as their impact on higher education. Let me introduce my panel briefly. So first of all, we have Amir Husain, who's a serial entrepreneur and investor. Amir Husain is the founder of a company called SparkCognition, which recently, raised, I think, $120 million in Series D funding at a valuation of 1.4 billion. He's also very active within the US on various committees, dealing with the use of AI, particularly on the battlefield, but also, elsewhere as well. Our second panelist is Dr. Tariq Banoori, who's the former chairman of HEC. Tariq is a professor at University of Utah, and his primary area of focus is sustainability and water economics. Tariq is also was also the one of the lead authors of the IPCC report on climate change, and finally, Dr. Sara Zubair, who is an educationist and is a faculty at Lahore University of Management Sciences School of Education. Sara was previously the head of communications and CSR at Beacon House, and holds a PhD in curriculum and instructional design. So welcome to all three of you. We look forward to an exciting discussion. I think this is a very pertinent discussion, and a lot of people that I spoke to about this panel, leading up to it, were very excited about what we have to say. And I know, there are several panels like these happening all across. And in fact, there was a panel at, LUMS a couple of days ago, really addressing the same issues. So the way I would do it is, instead of me making my opening remarks and influencing what everybody else has to say, I would let the panelists make an opening statement, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. If you can make an opening statement around the issue, briefly maybe introduce your work that also deals with the issue at hand, and then once everybody has made an opening statement, we will then go around the room with some questions and comments, etc. So with that, let me open the floor with Amir Husain, who's probably the only technical person. So Amir, most of the burden of explaining the technology to us would fall on you. So over to you, Amir.
Well, thank you very much, Athar, and it's wonderful to be with such a distinguished set of co-panelists. So welcome all. As far as my own work is concerned, for many years I've been working in artificial intelligence, and you spoke about SparkCognition. Yes, indeed, SparkCognition for the last many years has been focused on applying artificial intelligence to industrial problems. My view is that ultimately much of the strife in the world is connected to issues of plenty and scarcity. And it is this infrastructure across the world that actually allows us to live in a world of plenty. Sometimes it's not just about capacity issues, it's about logistics issues, it's about distribution issues, and so on. And there's $100 trillion worth of infrastructure globally in the world. So how do you make that infrastructure smarter and better and more compliant with, let's say, the need to reduce carbon footprints, without wrapping it in the smart shell, in the smart fabric of artificial intelligence? That is has been my life's goal for the last decade plus. And I connect this mission not just to the achievement of a technical outcome, but also to betterment in society. As I said, fundamentally, it goes at the heart of the issue, which is an issue of scarcity and plenty. And given human nature, our propensity to act in a dignified way, more generally, when we have plenty, and lack thereof when we have scarcity. So that is the lens that I bring into this. Yes, I'm a computer scientist by training, but I also serve on the Council on Foreign Relations. I am on the board of UT Austin Computer Science and numerous other international boards focused on innovation. And my book, The Sentient Machine, covers a lot of these topics in great depth. With that being said, that being the lens that I'm sort of looking at all of these things through, ChatGPT to me is, an evolution in sequence prediction systems. Not to get very technical, but for a long time, we've had statistical methods, Markov chains, etc., that have looked at the frequency of something that's happened in the past, and based on that frequency of what's happened in the past, be able to predict what might happen in the future. Now, this can also be for words. It doesn't just have to be for events. It doesn't just have to be for numbers. And so when you apply this sort of thing, trained on a very, very vast corpus, a huge amount of text, what you find is that these predictions get pretty coherent. And the context over large sequences of words starts to get quite coherent. It's the kind of thing where if somebody says, Mary has a little, most people would say Mary has a little lamb. Why? Because they've heard Mary has a little so many times, and their brain is predicting the next word. In some sense, that's what ChatGPT is doing, but it's doing a lot more. And as we get deeper into this conversation, I'll tell you about some of the things that it's doing, which actually enable this type of system to create a real understanding, within quotes, a real understanding of what it's saying, and with real context and with some memory. So we'll deconstruct this as we go on, but for now, let me just say that the marriage of a vast quantity of data with techniques that have been around for a long time, but now perfected using the use of transformers and new models, have really resulted in this. This was a natural step in the evolution of certain classes of deep learning models.
Great, thank you very much, Amir. We will certainly discuss the technology a little bit more further into the conversations. But with that, I would let maybe Sarah, if you can make a comment, make an opening statement about how, as an educationist, how do you see this? And you're obviously an expert in language and curriculum. So how do you see ChatGPT and similar models as an education?
So I wear two hats currently. So I'm also teaching a course on curriculum review and design. And at the same time, I'm also in a corporate communications department where I look at communications and content generation. And in both of these arenas, ChatGPT has suddenly sort of popped up as something that is intriguing and in certain cases worrying. So having said that, I'm just going to go on a bit of a tangent. Narrative is my preferred mode of communication, so we'll go with that. A friend of mine knows the city very well. And when she's driving around in the city, she knows the side lanes and she knows the hidden routes and she knows, how to get from point A to point B very efficiently. And so her relationship with GPS is very, very fraught. And she's always trying to one up the GPS. She's always trying to show that she knows better. I, on the other hand, would lose my way anywhere. And so for me, what the GPS does is it gets me where I need to be, usually, despite mangling names of roads and so on and so forth, or usually in a reasonable amount of time. To me, that analogy is kind of where I see ChatGPT at the moment. For those who evaluate it from different perspectives, it is behaving in a certain way and it is very, very flawed. For those for whom it is filling a need, it is giving something, whether that something is efficiency, whether that something is productivity, or whether that something is basic communication. So I'm looking at sort of both of these things in tandem. So that would be my start.
Great, thank you very much. So with that, I turn to Tariq. So as I think as a policymaker, perhaps you'd like to make your opening statement.
To bring in a kind of a longer term perspective on this. Just to, again, using Sarah's idea to kind of refer to something else like a story. A bit more than 100 years ago, a major innovation took place in the field of business, namely the assembly line. Right, 1913, December 1913, when Ford Motor Company, the Highland Park, introduced this assembly line for producing cars. And through that process, what they did was to massively reduce the cost and massively increase efficiency. Instead of taking 12 to 15 hours for production of one car, it was down to 93 minutes. Cost came down to 1/4 of where it was. And, and the whole thing was that what they did is, following the work of the scientific management people, Frederick Winslow Taylor and the Gilbreths, what they did is to divide up the task into manageable components, right? So the car production was divided into 84 components, and that's how it was done. Now, if you think about it, there's an analogy to what we are seeing today. So in some sense, what they did is that, look, here is a kind of a production system which has a lot of craftsmanship in it. And from that, what they did is to take out the routinizable elements, because the routinizable elements don't necessarily need us to, think beyond a certain thing that can be automated, that can be done by machines, that can even be done by low-skilled human labor, as was the case in this thing, in the Ford Motor Company. So this idea of taking something which is very complex, breaking it down into components, relegating the routinizable parts to, let's say, more mechanical operations, and then leaving the task for us to remain at kind of a more of a design and thinking and creative atmosphere. To give you an example, just as an analogy for this, once somebody asked him, can you draw a perfect circle? And I don't know if you've seen that famous Picasso circle, he drew a perfect circle, and then at the end, he did a squiggle. And somebody asked him why he did that squiggle. He said, if I'd done the complete circle, that would be geometry. Because I've done the squiggle, it is art. That means that, there's something which is routinizable and something which is not routinizable. And that part, which is sophisticated, is something that we do. Now, this is something that we have done from time immemorial. I can actually give you examples of Archimedes and Plato and Newton. A lot of people have been actually working on something like this. My friend Stephen Marglin distinguishes between two types of knowledge. Knowledge which is, cerebral and, almost mathematical, algorithmic, and a knowledge which is more creative and more personally, more embedded in the person. He calls them episteme from epistemic and techne from technique. And so he sees this, that there's a long struggle in trying to deal with techne and episteme and, extracting episteme and handing it over to different types of production systems. Now, you actually see that was 100 years ago. It happened because we had a massive increase in energy that was available to us. And because of that, we were able to make some increases in production. 100 years later, we have a massive increase in computing power. And as a result of that, we've done the same thing. We've again taken the processes that we are looking at and tried to extract some of the things which are routinizable. So we do a lot of things in research, in just writing letters, in human resource management. there are lots of things which are routinizable. And the question is it possible for us to hand them over to more mechanical operations? And what ChatGPT has done is it has shown us a major breakthrough in our ability to do this, right? So it's really a tension between the techne and the episteme. It has actually brought something into the domain of episteme, and having brought it there, it has made it more manageable for us. And of course, the process through which it has gone, I think Amir Husain is probably the best person to talk about it. Now, it has a number of implications for us. One, of course, is that the areas which are much more textual in nature, the work-related areas which are more textual in nature, will benefit the most from it. And maybe not only will they benefit the most from it, the nature of work in those areas will change. So law, human resources, even teaching and research are likely to change quite a bit. Medicine is probably also going to change a bit because there are lots of things which are actually routinizable. But in Pakistan, we have particular problems because our ability to write and ability to document things has been quite weak, and therefore it is quite possible that we miss out some of these things. So these are the things that we need to worry about. The second thing is that it's not only there's a kind of a reification fetish in Pakistan. So if we see a text which is supposedly written by a machine, there is an inclination to believe it. Although they can make a lot of mistakes. And I think the internet is full of examples of the way places where ChatGPT or other AI systems have made mistakes. There are mistakes in terms of falsehoods, which are called hallucinations, that the system is hallucinating, it comes up with something which is completely false, and there's a tendency for people to believe it. There's also a tendency towards hate speech. There's the example of what was it? Microsoft introduces this avatar called Tay to interact with young people. And within 24 hours, they had to take it down because all of a sudden, this avatar, because it was trained on the past literature, suddenly went into massive rants against all sorts of people and, genocidal kind of statements and hate speech, etc., etc. So Microsoft had to take it down because they couldn't sustain it. There's also woke speech. So when they try to correct it, they put in some safeguards because of which it comes out totally soporific, etc., etc. So those are also things that we will need to be addressed, and I think our desire to believe in them is going to be a major problem. There's also the fact that these systems, even though they have made some breakthrough and they actually write text, which seems to be quite indistinguishable from humans, the problem is it's totally opaque. We have no idea where it's coming from. Why does a program end up saying something what it is saying? What is the provenance of it? What is the logic behind it? Sometimes there are, so every time I've gone out and checked, I've found some mistakes in whatever is being said. And so there's a danger that the opaqueness is actually going to either destroy the trust of these systems, or it might actually lead to outcomes which are not really desirable. Now, so I think, looking at this, my own sense is that it is both Prometheus and Frankenstein, the topic of this seminar. That means it is, on the one hand, a major breakthrough in trying to convert knowledge into more practical, more feasible, more efficient systems. But on the other hand, it is also something which is likely to create huge problems. And those huge problems are likely to be something which might quickly go beyond our control. And all societies need to be able to address it. I think in Pakistan, we have a particular set of problems. So we need to bring our particular context into the discussion so that we can address these problems carefully. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Tariq. Thank you for that. So, obviously it's still a very new technology, at least in its current form, the ChatGPT, I think less than 2 months old or something like that. so still things are kind of surfacing, the behavior and everything, and it has been hailed on the one hand as a major breakthrough in AI, and on the other hand, as Henry Kissinger has put it, a major challenge for intellectualism. So, before we get into some of those things, let's try to clarify from Amir Husain what the technology is really capable of. So Amir, if you can briefly talk about the fact whether this is really the kind of breakthrough that people are talking about, or is it something that has been around for a while and has only gotten in the hands of people, and there is certain novelty to it, and that novelty will wear off? Or is it really a step towards an important step towards artificial general intelligence, which is what a lot of people are afraid of and are kind of warning against? So what is the limitations of the technology if it goes forward?
I mean, there's a lot to say already in context of what has been said here. The first thing I'll tell you is that, this kind of obsession with artificial general intelligence and being scared of artificial general intelligence over the last 2 decades, I've been fighting this fight. I've been speaking at South by Southwest, and I've had people protest outside my talks, stop the robots, and so on and so forth. And what I see is that over time, game theoretic things are in play in the world. So, for example, when I started talking about the application of artificial intelligence in the battle space, 7, 8, 10 years ago, we came up with this concept of hyperwar, and we published it from an academic perspective. There were a lot of people saying, well, this is never going to happen, ban it, ban it, ban it. My point of view was, you don't control everybody that you want to ban. So if one party elects to pursue software-based technology, which is invisible, it's not like a nuclear reactor that you can fly a U-2 over and verify that it exists in a country. It's basically unverifiable innovation. If you assume that there are multiple participants in the world and one is developing a technology of a type that gives them a tremendous advantage, what would you do, not knowing perfectly whether or not that person is complying with whatever law, framework, ban they need to be complying with? Game theory dictates that you will do the same. You will develop that capability because you will always worry that there's a 2%, 5% chance that the other person is doing it. So my point here is, the larger point is that in technology developments of this magnitude, there is a game theoretic push towards developing the technology fast. All of the discussions that emanate at the beginning of such a technology coming about, which are essentially, well, what's the plus and what's the minus? The point is, if the plus is larger than a certain quantum, and if the plus is larger than a quantum that would give you a relative advantage over another competitor, you are going to pursue it no matter what. So the first thing I would tell you is that based on my experience now with such technological innovations in the past, at least 2 or 3 times, ChatGPT is only going to get better, bigger, faster, and it's not going to be ChatGPT. The Chinese are working on Wudao 2.0, ChatGPT 4, which is a whole collection of models that's going to come out. There was 2 days ago, the Facebook or Meta, they had their Llama model, which has now been actually through 4chan, it's been leaked. So you can actually go download the Facebook Llama model and start building applications with that. The point is, it's out of the box, okay? There's no way in which this stays inside the box. So the discussion really now becomes, okay, what do we do with this that's constructive? And what are the potential downsides, knowing that we can't stop it? That should be the framework, not whether we can stop it regardless of the downside. So now there, what I'll tell you is that Banori Saab made a point earlier about the ability for these models to predict text. And therefore, he correlated that with the implication of these models on activities that are essentially textually productive in nature, writing a report, things like that, chat, etc. In reality, what's happening inside the AI is not at all, it doesn't care about the text. These are tokens. They can be tokens depicting anything in a sequence. And the amazing thing here is that the amount of human intelligence and activity that is just token and sequence prediction has been kind of exposed. The reason why ChatGPT and actually multimodal models, so ChatGPT is basically text in, text out, right? That's what it does right now. All of the tokens, these individual words that are being predicted by ChatGPT, they're just tokens. One token is one word. There you go. Now, what if tokens are also pixels? What if tokens are fragments of a picture? What if tokens are fragments of an audio signature, or fragments of sound, fragments of the output of a vibration sensor? All of these things are legitimate tokens. So it is not the case that this technology is limited to text. In fact, GPT-4 and WuDao 2.0 and many of the models that are already working in labs are multimodal in nature. What does that mean? That means that in a few months, we will be entering a world where you will be able to ask for text concerning a picture, have the picture explained back in text, and create a picture of a poetess, have the poetess write a poem, again, using these models, and then develop a beautiful singing voice for that poetess to sing the voice. And now with NERF, which is three-dimensional mapping of these images, create a virtual reality in which that world now exists for you. So no, it's not just about text, it's about everything. Another area of work that's happening, which is around taking tokens as action sequences. So for example, let's say I'm going to use a cricket example because PSL is going on these days. So what is a well-executed shot? Well, a well-executed shot is something that starts with a particular observation. How is the bowler going to deliver the delivery? Where the delivery is going to land? How do you position yourself? What footwork do you do? How do you execute through your wrists and arms and forearms, etc., a shot? All of these things can be broken down into tokens. Each individual atomic movement is a token. So GPT-3 does not care. You can give it tokens that are automatically captured through visual AI, watching a player play, map those individual atomic movements to a token, and then have GPT execute, as a consequence of it knowing what the best tokens are, to replay a perfect cricketing shot. In fact, there is work going on now in using these transformers and these large, what I would call token models, not just language models, to actually animate robots. So now those are the types of things that we are already at. I think the discussion, if it were to just talk about what is GPT and its text output, and is it what it says, is it true or false, and what does that do for an essay? I think we're already talking about something that's probably now a 6-month-old concern. The real concern is this is already out there. Nobody can stop it. It's already leaked. What are we going to do about it? How do our students, faculties, how do our educational organizations benefit from this? That's the conversation. It's not going to be put back in the box.
So the question, Amir, is not whether we can or should put it back in the box. I think the market's response to it and the technology's capabilities would decide whether it goes back into the box and just becomes a fad that passed away, or it will become something more consequential and meaningful. So maybe, Sarah, if you could comment on, based on what you know about the technology, whether is this something that's going to be used to kind of average out what is already available on the web or elsewhere as human creativity, or is it something that's going to create something new, something original, in which case there might be a much greater future for this technology?
As of this moment, I am very skeptical about this idea of it creating originality. And I'm talking about LLMs. Obviously, the token model is not something that is in current use, at least to my knowledge. So as far as the large language models are concerned, what you kind of see already is the attrition. You see this sort of what someone has called the blurry JPEG effect, where you take so much information and when you compress it, you lose some of the quality, and so it continues. So for me, this idea that it's going to eventually produce something that is unique, exciting, original. As of this moment, I would say not so much. The other point here in terms of creativity, which is sort of that strange space that some of us occupy. You can talk about it producing poetry, and ChatGPT, everybody is sort of testing it and saying, okay, write a poem in this style, write a poem in that style, and that's all very well. Can you talk about it, producing something that echoes a particular human emotion experience? Maybe something that has happened before, but can you talk about it in terms of, and at the risk of sounding whatever, a moment of magic, a happy little accident, can you talk about those things? Well, it's kind of, as far as I know, trained to smooth out those rough edges when it comes to language. It's trained not to give you the moment of serendipity, that moment of magic, that happy little accident, that something that sparks something new. So to my understanding as of where we stand right now, something new, something original, not so much. What I do see, and where I do see it playing a part in terms of a benefit in the Pakistani context, where higher education is a very high stakes game, where publish or perish, and all of that is happening with faculty, with promotions, with salaries, with tenure, where it's happening with students, where they have to get the grades, where they have to do these things in order to get the degree, in order to get the job. Does it help? Yes. So where it asks us to reevaluate, I would say, is it asks us to reevaluate what we mean by assessment. What do we want our students to learn? Do we want them to churn out the essay? Do we want to assess that essay and keep doing what we're doing? Or do we have to be a lot more responsive in terms of, this is a systemic issue. Plagiarism has happened before, it is going to happen again, it doesn't matter. Where do we see ourselves working with this as part of our system, moving beyond, I think, the question of intellectual property or creative property? It is about the human experience. It is about what we want humans to learn, to create. Is it replacing that? No, I would say no. Is it creating something original at this stage? I would say no. What it can do, well, I guess that remains to be seen.
So I think we'll get to what it can do again when we go back to Amir again. But Tariq, so it's quite obvious that this is going to have a tremendous impact on human capital and higher education and education in general. I think from what I've used it so far, it seems to me that it kind of eliminates of an average knowledge worker, whether that is a coder or a writer or a synthesizer of knowledge or whatever. So it kind of almost eliminates the job of an average knowledge worker. Most of what I would ask some people in my company now can be done by me in 15 minutes. Now, obviously, it increases the tasks of the higher level workers because it asks them to upgrade their skills so that they can begin to start integrating some of what it produces. So, barring these errors and citations and those issues. But what do you think the various stakeholders in the higher education ecosystem, how should they respond to this changing situation? And what should the higher education system do to kind of prepare for this dislocation? You're muted.
I mean, first of all, I don't have any disagreement with what both you and Amir Husain said. This breakthrough is here. it is going to get used in a variety of ways. And even when we say, what are its problems, it's not said with the perspective that because of these problems, let's, try to turn it off. Because, quite clearly the benefits, even at this stage, they far exceed the potential costs. The reason why one raises those points is because I think those are policy issues that do need to be addressed. And those policy issues require us to distinguish between things which are dangerous and things which are not. This, by the way, the EU has a draft proposal, the European Union has a draft proposal on artificial intelligence, in which one of the things they do is to say, let's try to distinguish between things that are potentially harmful. And those are things that have to do with human health, human mortality, things which can be potentially dangerous either to health or public safety. And then keep a much greater scrutiny on those as opposed to the things which are far more practical and mundane in character, and therefore the policy should distinguish between those and try to manage them. I do think there are a number of dangers. I mean, the hate speech issue is a particular one in our country. We know that even people who are leaders of the government in some sense engage in hate speech, and they unleash people on this thing. And then here is another source of information coming which sort of creates a sense of neutrality, but it might not be neutral because its provenance is not entirely clear. We do need to try to figure out how we can benefit from it without bearing the cost. And some kind of a policy framework, maybe even looking at the EU's policy framework may be a good idea. We also, I think it's quite well understood. I think Amir has pointed it out. It's not only a matter of text, it's text and images and scans and so forth. And all of those, I mean, the basic breakthrough that was made was in terms of the probability of making the right prediction. We know that probability has improved, that the efficacy of that has improved dramatically, but there are still problems and we need to deal with those problems. Now, when it comes to education, you can again see that there is, there's both the plus column and the minus column. On the plus column, it does make, if the idea is that if one thinks in terms of human learning, what is it that people need to know in order to be successful? How do you make it available to them? There are lots of things which can improve the efficiency and the impact of the processes which are dealing with human learning on the one hand. On the other hand, which is also a very central part of the education system, namely the system of evaluation, certification, some kind of a market signaling system, right? When we teach people, it's not only a responsibility to teach people, but to tell people how they can help you in the kind of work that you're engaged in. So we give certificates, we give A grade to somebody, B grade to somebody, etc. Now that system is going to go through a massive change because the way it is structured now did not take into account of the fact that something like ChatGPT would come down the pike. And therefore we need to restructure it. And it might mean that in order to provide the best teaching outcomes, that a professor may have to spend less time in terms of their normal pedagogical activities, in terms of eliciting the material, providing the material to the students, etc., and more time on evaluation. It's quite possible that the balance sheet might shift. We will still end up spending the same amount of time, but instead of spending it more on this activity, we'll have to spend more time on this activity. So this kind of a thing we need to understand. That means when I look at some of the teaching relating challenges in Pakistan, development of curriculum, syllabi, examples of lesson plans, examples of good teaching, etc. I think what this breakthrough is going to do is to make it easier for us to access them. Right? We have gradually made a lot of progress, but I think this is quite a significant progress now. But on the other hand, evaluation systems are still stuck in the 20th century, and we need to come into the 21st century, and that will require more effort. That's the first thing. Similarly, in terms of research, as you know, there is a lot of fake research that goes on, which is basically just kind of rehashing some of the material and putting it together. And one of the reasons why it had a certain degree of market was because it still required a little bit of time in order for somebody to do it, even if they did not have any creativity or any insight. Now, the thing is that it's going to become quite irrelevant. So when we are teaching people to do research, or when we are encouraging people to do research, we have to make sure that people understand that you should not waste your time in doing something that a machine can do far better than you, far more easily and far less effectively. Like when you said that, I needed a lot of people to do something, and now I don't need to have those people because the machine will do something for me in much less time and much more effectively. So we need to teach people to do the kind of things which the future market will require, rather than to teach them to do things which are no longer needed. Right? That's the transformation. And research is going to go through a fundamental change. I hope for the better, because once people begin to understand that this old sort of system of rehashing some of the earlier ideas is not going to be very, very productive.
Great, thank you very much. So, we go back to Amir. So Amir, can you, so with this type of models, things like ChatGPT, whether they are in the text domain or in the images domain or video domain, can you kind of describe what kind of capabilities can they theoretically have? And the question that we are trying to address, whether this kind of technology can actually generate something original, or is this kind of technology only useful for, automating the kind of, more average grunt work sort of a thing? You're mute again.
It can absolutely generate things that are original, and artificial intelligence has been generating original things for a long time. One of the big problems in the field of AI is that the regular sort of community that's looking at AI but isn't part of it looks at a problem and says, chess. Well, chess is this 2,000-year-old unbelievable game, and it reflects so much human wisdom and strategy, and nothing can ever play chess. Well, then you have a computer that defeats the grandmaster at chess. Now, chess, everybody knew. Chess was just a mechanical, mathematical thing. So you go on to the next thing. Okay, Go. Go is like 100 times, 1,000 times more complex. And the computer goes and defeats the number one human in Go. And it's like, well, there was some mistake, obviously. Let's move on to the next thing. It'll never be able to write poetry. It'll never be able to do prose. It's all crumbling. This whole thing, this whole argument of what a machine can and cannot do, the machine can do exactly what we can do in time. Now, your question is more precise, which is, what can these technologies do that are unique? Well, let me tell you that AI has been discovering materials, and in electrical engineering, discovering VLSI junctions and VLSI components that no human being has discovered. AI has been used to prove theorems that human beings couldn't prove. In the traditional sense, in all of these fields, in mathematics, electrical engineering, etc., these are all new innovations. If a human had done it, they would have gotten a paper and a patent and so on and so forth out of it. So absolutely. Now, one thing that people miss in this new transformer architecture, because it's easy to understand, okay, it's prediction, so it's the next word, but it's a lot more than that. My sister is a string theorist. I often have conversations with her and I ask her, like, how does this work and how does that work? And one day she just said to me, she said, listen, stop asking me these questions because you'll never understand. And I said, why? Why won't I ever understand? And she said, because you don't speak the language. The language of string theory is mathematics. It's not English. Every time you try and dumb something down into English, it takes away from what's actually happening. And yes, it's a proxy, but it's not the truth. And then people try and build hard opinions over proxy understandings, not real deep first principles understandings. In artificial intelligence, it's the same thing. So the equivalent here is, Oh, yeah, I figured out ChatGPT. All it does is it took a lot of data and it can predict the next word, right? So given that understanding of ChatGPT, of course, it can never do anything original, except that that understanding is not correct. One of the things that's happening with these transformers is that what you're training them on is not individual words. You're training them on large vectors of words, and you are calculating what's called in the art word embeddings. The multi-dimensional, very, very high dimensional relationships between words. And in common parlance, perhaps as a human being, you would refer to them as style and grammar and rules and propriety, and all of these constructs that we have in the human world are ultimately manifested as a combination of relationships. Those relationships are being captured in word embeddings. The word embeddings are what are going into the transformer. So again, a lot of this would be like, a lot of people listening would be, what the hell is this guy on about, word embeddings and transformers? And it's the same thing that my sister said, which is, unfortunately, this is the language of the art. And until one really gets deep into this language of the art, you really can't see exactly why it can create unique things, but it can. The other proof is it has strategies in Go and chess and discovery of devices. And now AI is being used for drug design. Why do you think that is? If human beings can do original drug design, why do you think AI is being applied to drug design? Why do you think Airbus is using AI to design new structures that no human could have designed, that reduce the weight, but then also increase the strength of that structure, creating a better airplane, right? More payload, lower consumption, and so on. So this question of, I tell you, this is a very Galileo Copernicus story repeating now in the current age. We are the center of the universe. And some poor chap figured out we weren't the center of the universe. Off with his head. Then the next day I said, oh, okay. We're not the center of the universe, but maybe we're the center of the solar system. No, we're not the center of the solar system either. We're off with his head, right? So until you discover you're not the center of the universe, you're not the center of the solar system, you're not particularly meaningful, you're a pale blue dot, Carl Sagan, and then you've got to adjust to that. Okay, that's where we are intellectually. You see, our only unique capability in the universe, we're not faster than a cheetah, we're not stronger than an elephant, we're not, braver than a lion or a gorilla. Really what we are is maybe the smartest as a species. So now that, through invention, is slipping away, and it's a real moment of existential angst. But my philosophy is, don't let the moment of existential angst prevent you from doing that which you can do to make yourself better, right? So, I mean, there's a whole, one can go into the story of Genesis and the fact that even if you just look at it as literature, but the idea that we envision a perfect creator, that perfect creator had created everything in the universe. Why did that creator need to create Adam? Because there was nothing in the universe that could in turn create. And Adam was told, you've been taught the nature of all things, the names and natures of all things. So I'm not pushing this as a religious story. I'm just using it as a literary allegory. And I'm just saying that even in our own mind, a perfect creator, a better creator is he or she who can create something that can in turn create. That's where the human race is now. And we're having a little bit of a couple of spasms about it. That's it.
Okay, great, Sarah. So, again, how I would, narrow the discussion a little bit, go back to the ChatGPT and related technologies and not the broader AI framework. And I think in the broader AI framework, there's a lot more room, but in ChatGPT, there are still significant limitations. And it might be that, this is just 10% of what is possible within this range of models. And in the next several years, we might see this unfold as a 10x or 100x better capability or 1000x better capability. And that could be one thing. But from what is available right now, it seems to me that it makes it difficult for people, particularly in the education sector. This is, relevant both in terms of assessments, but also just the the assessment of people, right? So if you were interviewing somebody for a job in a university, you would ask them to go and design a course in a particular domain where there would be no course, no such course would exist. So you'd ask them to do a totally novel course design, and that would be a fairly good indicator of that person's capability. Now you can do that task literally within the span of 40 seconds. I in fact sent Tariq, somebody posted on the web a course designed on human rights in Islam. And ChatGPT obviously turned up a whole course design on human rights in Islam. The problem obviously is that I have now no way to assess that person's capability, whom I've given this task. The other problem in all of this is that there were serious errors with that course. In the design of this course outline, the ChatGPT was actually inventing citations that don't exist, right? So how do you, how does this technology makes the job of an educationist, difficult, particularly in terms of assessing talent and those kinds of things?
So first, just a small comment to what Amir is saying. I think, every now and then humans have this existential crisis, and certainly from my perspective, the death of the author is resurrected or resuscitated every now and then as something where we realize that perhaps, we are not the sole voice that needs to be considered, heard, understood. And I think, to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that sort of reevaluation and that existential angst is probably a productive space. So just to sort of respond to that, and then Athar, in terms of what you're saying, I think as of this moment within assessment, certainly in my classroom these days, it's a very short-sighted sort of an approach to things, because I made sure that my students knew about ChatGPT. They're all budding educationists. Certainly they should know. I made sure that they start working with it rather than that sort of knee-jerk reaction of clamping down and saying, "Nahin, don't bring a phone into the school and don't start using this," and so on and so forth. Well, use it, see how it works, see how it works for you. And again, I'm not so naive to say that an honor code is going to work here. Where they will use it, they will use it, and so they should. I think the onus at this point rests on me as the instructor to say, okay, what can I do? Not to sound too knowledgeable about things I don't know, but I believe adversarial testing in cybersecurity is something that is used. You can possibly draw on that idea within the classroom to say, okay, how am I going to get my students to respond in a way that does not allow ChatGPT to do that? And there is one interesting little example where that has happened, where I've posed a question that was related to a discussion, and there's nothing online as yet that could respond to that question very accurately. Funnily enough, it's interesting being in Pakistan, having been through the typical board exams in intermediate and bachelor's and so on and so forth, where you have the handwritten exam. Maybe those people are faring better, who's to say? Different scripts at the moment, other than English, maybe they're faring better, who's to say? Can't really say. Do we have room for bilingualism and multilingualism? Maybe it's time to start talking about that, to see how language plays out in those arenas, because we've always been saying, well, some of us educators have been saying there's room to recognize that people are bilingual, people are multilingual, and how does that work in the writing classroom? More specifically, I think, as I said, I wear two hats. So as far as the communication part, the content generation part goes, I see people on my team who have to churn out 50 million captions for different social media posts. Well, we're just more efficient, we're quicker. And because content is the domain within which we work, not every caption it gives us is good enough. We know how to evaluate what's going to work better. We have certain parameters within which to work. But yeah, we work faster, we work, more efficiently. In terms of grading, I will be honest, I've tried it out, ChatGPT for grading as well. That's interesting. It gives me very, very, convincing sounding feedback that I can pass on to my students. It tells me that my student has a very good understanding of the article, but it has no idea what the article is actually about. So, I think coming at it in a very roundabout way, I think we have to step up, but we also have to put our minds together to see where all we're willing to make certain changes. Language, yes, we do need to make certain changes when it comes to multilingualism, bilingualism. I think that's a space. This is an opportunity to explore that space.
Great. Thank you. So I think before we get to some audience questions, and please feel free to post questions in the chat window so I can ask those from our panelists. Maybe the last question from Tariq. So Tariq, if you can put on your philosopher's hat and maybe a comment on what Henry Kissinger and his colleagues wrote last week. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, where it sort of described this as the crisis of intellectualism. And just to sort of lay out for the rest of the audience, what Henry Kissinger described was that what ChatGPT and similar softwares were doing was really creating, was kind of averaging out the human output on the internet and elsewhere. And in this process of averaging out, you can see that as you create the averages of averages, with the automation speed with which it will automate content, and the new content will be the average of the already existing content, the average of the content overall available on the internet will go down. And so it would ultimately lead to a situation where most of the content that we are available to us on the internet today has been written by humans with all their failings and capabilities. Tomorrow, most of that would be written by machines. And if it remains as dumb as it is, this would lead to a major crisis of intellectualism, right? So that's kind of how Henry Kissinger and colleagues made the argument. So I would like you to kind of comment on that a little bit.
These, and I also include Amir's last statement in this. These are what can be called ideological statements. They're not, this is not really what the sort of, practical hands-on approach to this. It's an ideological statement to say that, look, this is creative or this is not creative. Or it's also an ideological statement to say that, if it chooses the average of the past, it will actually dumb down the conversation so that it actually begins to gravitate towards the average, right? It becomes regressive in nature. These are political statements. Because for each of these political statements, there is a counter. And yes, we know that there are people who are partisans of various points of view, and they have to make political or ideological statements in order to express their point of view. But one can basically either agree with them or disagree with them, but that should not stop us from collaborating with them. So question number one for me is the following. Just to, step back a little bit. I know you want me to focus on Kissinger et al., but I'm still thinking about the very interesting points that Amir Husain made. So stepping back a little, the idea of what is creative has changed over time as we have been able to routinize more and more parts of our experience. To give one example, there was in the classical period, art was valued for its, how closely it resembled real life. right? So the artist who actually drew human figures or natural figures which were exactly like what they were in nature was the one who was valued. And then came photography. And as photography came, it became routinized. And the nature of art creativity actually moved on from there to something else. It went on to Impressionism, to Cubism, other ways in which people express themselves, because it is that uniqueness which actually made it special. As Picasso's a story that I mentioned about Picasso, he said, if I draw a perfect circle, that's geometry. A compass can do that. But the artist, it is what the artist does which is special that draws your attention. And the purpose of the artist is to draw your attention to things, right? And so the nature of art, the nature of creativity has changed. I go to things like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and so forth and look at these beautiful things that they've produced. And they're absolutely beautiful, right? You actually give them a prompt and say, I'm thinking about angels and demons and machines and something or the other, and it will present you something. And at some level, we will very quickly realize that that's not what creativity is. And we will look for creativity elsewhere, because the purpose of creativity is not to reproduce the mundane, the ordinary, the routine. The purpose of creativity is to take us beyond where we are. So I think that is a debate that will continue. But having said that, I still feel that when I look at some of these websites and I look at the things that they produce, I enjoy it and I find it very beautiful. So maybe the nature of aesthetics will change. Maybe creativity and aesthetics become completely separate. So in any case, these are debates that will continue. At this moment, what we are trying to figure out is how best to use it. I think one of the things that concerns me as much as it concerns Kissinger et al. Is that because the technology that we are using privileges the past, tries to sort of bring it together, it has a lot of downsides. This is why I gave the example of Tay, which Microsoft had introduced. They introduced a young avatar to interact with young people. And lo and behold, within 24 hours, it was spouting the worst kind of hate speech that you can imagine. The worst kind of hate speech. Everybody was on the firing line. Now, the thing is, it was because they put somebody in that domain, and it reflects whatever is in that domain and tries to pull it together. You create an avatar in Pakistan and you look at the worst kind of hate speech which is on your social media, that will begin to come out of the mouth of this person, and you feel that there will be that this will have problems and so forth. Of course, it's made much worse by the fact that it's no longer anonymous, but it represents something or the other. So a lot of us are concerned about the provenance of the kind of things that are being said, how to make sure that it doesn't, how to make sure that it is not reified, that the products which this is produced are not deemed to be somehow magisterial in nature. That is something that we have to believe. We have to bring it down to a level where we can deal with them. This is also goes back to the example that you gave of the curriculum. Now, you see, I have taught for several years. My chairman once in a while would come and say, Tariq, can you teach this course? And I know I've studied the subject, etc. Maybe I'm not sort of completely fresh on it, but I have to sit down for a whole summer and sit down and try to design the course. And I look at a lot of examples, and if I have a teaching assistant, I would then tell the teaching assistant, pull out some syllabuses, let's look at the syllabuses, pull out some textbooks, let's look at the textbooks and so forth. Now, what ChatGPT will do is it will make that task easier for me. But it will not remove the task altogether, because I don't trust it. I have to teach my course. So I pull down I asked ChatGPT to come out to say, give me a course curriculum, give me some learning objectives. And I sit down with them and say, is this what I really want to teach? Maybe I look at some other examples, I look at textbooks, and try to figure out what it is. So, but it does is it actually makes a lot of the grunge work easy. But the creative work, it actually gives me a little bit more time to do the creative work. I don't get caught up in the grunge work, right? It just makes it easy. But if I start trusting it blindly, I would go completely astray. But even if I were not to trust it blindly, it shifts the balance of the time that I give from one to the other, right? So I think, at some level, I feel that Kissinger et al. Are right in sort of pointing out to one possible drawback of this, major breakthrough that we have achieved. But I also feel that this is a drawback that we need to address through our policies and through our individual responses.
Great. Thank you very much. So we've, I think we run over time. I would let everybody make a closing statement perhaps. And in that closing statement, if you can focus on, what are the opportunities or challenges for countries like Pakistan and academic system within Pakistan, the education system within Pakistan. And then I have one question towards the end with Tariq from one of the audience members. So, but over to you, Amir, from your vantage point, with all of this technology being developed and deployed, what do you think people in Pakistan should do, or policymakers in Pakistan should do?
Yeah, I think people in Pakistan should lean in hard and use this and try and actually be the greatest adopters of this technology globally. There's an issue in Pakistan around, let's say, the fluency in the English language. ChatGPT can help you take your basic ideas that might not be expressed in perfect English and make them fairly readable. So your ability to correspond with foreign counterparts increases. Your ability to run businesses on the back of that, whether it's a software business or call center business or some other kind of business that requires that sort of work, increases. So use it, fix your English, make money. The second thing is, I think in schools and as far as universities are concerned, it should just be mandated as a tool. It should be mandated, and what professors, teachers should be looking for is how creative somebody is in extracting better or worse from ChatGPT. There's an entire profession of people coming up now that are called prompt designers. How intelligently can you prompt the system to get more out of it? Also, these things are compositional. One response given to you, you can then have that adapted and continue to increase the veracity of things. There are plugins now available for ChatGPT that address things like references, bad references, or do a reference check. So yeah, go ahead and use all the tools that are out there. And once you've got your full spectrum of, teachers should actually be telling kids that, look, this is the problem with what you did. The references were bad. Here's a plugin you can use that'll improve your references, but tell me, what did you get out of it? And what innovation in the workflow that you used to put together this information package, this outcome, was better than just raw ChatGPT. I could even imagine benchmarks where you ask ChatGPT a basic question and compare it to what children were able to do, students were able to do with more innovative uses of ChatGPT. And that basic ChatGPT question and answer becomes like a baseline, and you curve it based on that. Like, were you better or worse? Like, how smart were you in creating more value out of that base question? But the reality is, look, this is a superpower tool. I mean, you've just basically given everyone in Pakistan the ability to upscale their English, to summarize huge bodies of text and get knowledge from the, and summaries, it does really well, by the way. It doesn't invent stuff when you do summaries. So it's allowed you to do immense information processing. It's allowed you to then put together businesses, like Sarah was talking about, putting up headlines. You can now, with 2 people, run a social media business that would have maybe required 20 people. In terms of code, I was just having this conversation in my office yesterday. One of the senior developers came to me. They were working on a project, and he said, look, I just had ChatGPT in 2 hours generate all the code I needed that I would have otherwise required an intern to generate in a month. So I looked at him and I said, so you're telling me that whatever, like 10K worth of code you were able to get out of ChatGPT with no additional expense in 3 hours? And the guy was like, yeah, that's exactly what I did. So I said, well, hallelujah, keep doing that, right? Well, that's what we have to be practical. It's something that's useful now. Go get it and use it for as much benefit as you can.
Great, thank you very much, Amir. So Sarah, your final comments?
Yeah, I think definitely agree with Amir on all of that. I think also I would add to that what I'm hopeful about. Maybe I'm being ridiculously optimistic, but what I'm hopeful about is that the presence of tools like ChatGPT might render some of our content mills, these paper generating mills, those sorts of things a little obsolete, that make a lot of money off the back of people who need things written for them. I think it will give a lot of advantages to people who have the ideas, but not necessarily the English mechanics to put those ideas forward. You don't have to create literary masterpieces. I think in some other arenas, the first year composition course, which if anyone has studied the history of the composition course in the US, and certainly its exports around the world, it's time intensive and it is work intensive, grading intensive, and so on and so forth. That is an area where this can really make a difference. Reviewing journal articles, where so much of your time is spent on, again, other things, not substance. Let's focus on the substance instead, and let research do what it's meant to do, which is create new knowledge, rather than whether it fits the format of the journal and the requirements and so on and so forth. So yeah, there is a lot of scope. There is a lot of potential. And I would say, yes, let's do what we can with that potential. But of course, the creative, the poet, the writer, the side of me that perhaps wants to be the center of the universe, would like very much for the human to remain valid throughout this process. And I think that also is something I would like to keep emphasizing. The creativity and what the human brings into this conversation is very, very important. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. So Tariq, any implications for research? And also there's a question in the audience that talks about the ORIC structure within HEC and whether you think that has been successful or not, and how can it be improved? Particularly, I think somebody talks about how Park Launch can integrate with that. So if you can comment on those 2 things.
Well, the first thing is I do think that we have a growing consensus here. I think there's a lot of this development has opened up a huge field, and it's for us to take advantage of it. And I think, as Amir said, we should be in the forefront of it rather than at the back end. Tom Bayou, the impact factors producer, he says, look, there's a lot of money now. People are going to make a lot of money. I want you to get out there and make some money. And I think the areas in which are going to go through the transformation, law, police, human resource, not human resource development, but human resource employment, recruitment, etc. I mean, these are huge areas, medicine, which are going to go through a transformation. And I think it is for entrepreneurs to come out and start developing products which can help and which can replace the existing archaic and other products. Now, ORIC, improvement of ORIC. I mean, ORIC was a bad idea in the first place. Well, it wasn't a bad idea, but the structure of research was so corrupt that ORIC was not able to help. But now here is a chance, maybe even for outsiders, to come in and try to help reform that system by creating new forms of evaluation, new forms of assessment, and new forms of promotion. So I think that there are ways in which we can learn from this. One example that really appeals to me is this guy who created Stable Diffusion, this text-to-image software, Imad Mushtaq. I think he's Bangladeshi. Imad Mushtaq, his son was autistic, and therefore had difficulty with learning and difficulty also with words and image. So he actually began to develop something because of that particular concern, and he has come up with this text-to-image software, which is fantastic, right? And it's going to be one of the major innovators. So I think there are problems out there which individuals can now begin to respond to, and clearly there's a lot of money to be made and a lot of success to be achieved through those kind of things. The second thing, so that's generally in the area of research, entrepreneurship. But in the area of teaching and research, I think that there are some things which are now going to become easier for people there, because they will become routinized because of this intervention. And I think all the teachers and the researchers should take advantage from it. It's very easy now to ask ChatGPT to say, what are the open questions in this area? So that you're actually beginning to respond to that. It's also very easy to say, what are the learning objectives in teaching a course like this? Or, what is a sample syllabus for this thing? But that's a kind of a starting point to which then you can begin to contribute. But there are a number of other areas which are going to become more difficult because there's a game theoretical aspect to it, that other people are going to be using them, and you need to sort of improve your own performance much better.
So Tariq, can I wrap it up? I think a couple of the panelists have to go for another meeting. So we need to wrap it up here, but thank you very much everyone for joining. This was an amazing, scintillating discussion, and I hope we can continue this discussion. A lot of people weren't able to join the call and are asking for where this meeting will be on the web. So I don't know if there's a YouTube channel where we could continue with some of these conversations. There were lots of questions on the chat window that I couldn't ask, but really, an amazing discussion, and thank you very much once again, everyone, for joining. So I think the conclusion seems to be that let's go out and make some money.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sarah, that's for you.
Wonderful, everyone. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.